call to order meeting of the James City County Wetlands Board, and I have a definition to read. For our reason of existence, we are the responsibility of this board to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to present their dissertation. Can I have the roll call, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Guessman?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
And Mr. O'Brien?
Here. Anyone have any corrections, additions to the minutes?
Nope.
Anything which minutes stand approved? We're moving right along with public hearings. First case will be WJPA 20-0024. Mr. Wilson's going to be our presenter, and it's 176 the Main of revetment.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner, here to present case WJPA 20-0024, David and Diane Lee at 176 The Main. Mr. David Butler has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. David and Ms. Diane Lee to remove and replace a portion of a pier, riprap revetment, dock, stairway extension and repair on property located at 176 The Main within the James River watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 454-02-00061. The parcel here, located outlined in blue. There is an existing failed wooden bulkhead on the property. Immediately behind this is a failed upland retaining wall. To repair these failures and to prevent future failures of the remaining bulkhead and retaining wall, a riprap revetment is proposed seaward of the bulkhead. The revetment extends seaward from the existing wall and will have a 12-foot bottom width. The construction of this revetment is from the water and includes a non-woven geotextile fabric overlain with Class 1 riprap core stone up to 150 pounds, 2 layers of Class 2 armor riprap up to 500 pounds, a buried toe at elevation negative 1.5 mean sea level, and have a top elevation of 5 feet mean sea level. The permit drawings suggest that the bulkhead will be rebuilt in the area where it has failed. Upon further consultation with the contractor, that is not the case. The area behind the bulkhead is non-vegetated wetlands and is being proposed to be filled, thus impacting 40 square feet of non-vegetated wetland. The failed upland retaining wall on the western part of the property will not be rebuilt. The area is proposed to be filled with sand from an upland source, which staff believes will not be stable. Again, upon consultation with the contractor, that is being changed to a clay sand soil mix as opposed to what was originally proposed. The existing steps into the water will be repaired and extend over the new revetment. The area between the existing southern wall and the existing bulkhead is proposed to be filled with sand, which again, staff believes will not be stable and remain in place. The adjacent property has a revetment that is approximately 2 feet higher than the proposed revetment on this property. Topography of the site, this bank has been regraded in the past, bulkhead put in, 2 retaining walls were put in about 4 feet upland of the bulkhead. Floodplain as it impacts this property, it is in the VE zone, which is includes wave action, and the elevation of that is 14 feet mean sea level, and the base flood elevation has been determined to be 9 feet mean sea level. From the application, permit drawings, the existing steps coming down the slope, the landing, and then the pier and boathouse. This area here is new riprap revetment. It is all below mean low water, and thus outside of the board's jurisdiction. This area here is part of that area to be filled. The retaining wall is here. And then looking at the other half of the property, again, the revetment in front of the bulkhead. The bulkhead has been blown out in this area. That is not to be reinstalled. This area will be backfilled and the slope regraded. The retaining wall that was here will not be rebuilt. Cross section of the revetment showing the impacts are all subaqueous here, except for the one part where the bulkhead had failed and now non-tidal or non-vegetated tidal wetland. Some site photographs. The retaining wall's here, the bulkhead is here that have failed. This landing platform and deck and the steps will all be replaced. From the pier looking back, see this retaining wall has failed. This area will be backfilled and regraded to a stable 3-to-1 or 2.5-to-1 slope, whatever that slope needs to be. Out from near the boathouse, looking back at the property, this part of the bulkhead will be removed. This whole retaining wall will be removed. The revetments in front of the remaining bulkhead here and here. And then this blowout will be filled in and that slope reestablished. On the other side of the property, this is the area they were proposing to backfill. This bulkhead remains in place. The revetment comes out seaward from that. The top of the bulkhead is currently what the proposal is for the top of the revetment. Staff suggests that that revetment tie into the same elevation as the adjacent neighboring property. And this area here would be backfilled, and then the revetment here. The other way back towards the damaged steps. So from the mitigation discussion, the wetland mitigation compensation policy and supplemental guidelines per the Virginia Administrative Code, they are committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetland acreage and function in the regulatory programs. And in order for a project to be authorized to impact wetlands and to compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated into the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. Staff's reviewed this application and finds that the project does meet the 3 criteria outlined above, and as there are no vegetated wetland impacts, no mitigation is required. Staff does not make a recommendation on this application, but should the board wish to approve the application, staff does suggest the following conditions be incorporated into that proposal or that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary local, federal, or state permits as required for the project. And that development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, the floodplain area regulations of James City County zoning ordinance, and receive all required approval and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. That the soil backfill, or the backfill shall be soil similar in texture to the existing soil and not sand. It shall be a clay sand mixture. That all disturbed soil shall be stabilized accordingly. That the failed retaining wall and the failed portion of the bulkhead shall not be rebuilt. That the top of the revetment shall be at elevation 7 feet mean sea level. That the existing pier and piles to be removed, the failed bulkhead and failed retaining wall shall be disposed of in an approved off-site disposal site. That the wetlands permit shall expire on August 12, 2021 if construction has not begun. And that if an extension of the permit is needed, a written request shall be submitted to the Stormwater Division no later than July 1, 2021, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this application.
Thank you, sir. Any questions, Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wilson, could you on the plan view just outline the areas within the project where our jurisdiction overlaps the proposed activity?
Would be in this area here.
That is for the placement of the sand fill.
Placement of the fill, correct.
So none of the riprap and the bulkhead replacement is not reoccurring.
That's the area where the bulkhead has failed.
Right.
So it depends on how the contractor,
But they're not replacing the bulkhead before
they're not
putting the
replacing
revetment.
it. So it just depends on how they do the revetment in that area. Whether that impact area is technically is rock or soil.
This riprap going to basically follow the other two home sites? I see you have riprap on both sides of this.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking at
That's
it.
the general idea.
The general idea to make it.
Correct, and the contractor can correct me,
Looks like it needs
that's not correct.
It extends further seaward and it doesn't go back as landward as much.
Correct.
No questions?
Mr. Wilson, is VMRC, and I realize the riprap is outside our jurisdiction, but in this brings to mind a situation that might exist where somebody was doing maintenance work within our jurisdiction on a riprap revetment relative to the changes in the law that occurred in 1st of July. Has VMRC given you any guidance on how to interpret these activities relative to those changes?
Not on how to interpret, but that all new applications coming before the board have to comply with those regulations. Mr. Madden is here from VMRC and he could clarify that.
Questions? Thank you, sir. At this time, we'd like to open the public hearing for this application. Anyone here wish to come speak to this application? Please come forward. Seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing. Board members, your pleasure.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, most of this project is outside of our jurisdiction.
Yes, it is.
And I see the minimal amount of fill to be of little consequence.
Have a motion.
Make a motion. I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board Case WJPA 20-0024 at 176 The Main.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Moving on to the next case, WJPA 20-0023, 20 Markley Road. Case deferred by applicant.
Mr. Chair, staff suggests that you open up the public hearing and keep
Right.
it open. This case has been deferred to the September meeting, September 9th. And if you'd go ahead and open up the public hearing.
This time, I'd like to open the public hearing for this application.
I do have a written statement that a gentleman requested I read into the record, Mr. Chair.
We don't have copies of that, do we?
Do not.
Okay, I didn't think so. Please, go right ahead.
Subject, JPA permit for Waltrips Landing. Gentlemen, as a homeowner in Kings Point, I am directly opposite the area where the applicant proposes to install a 200-foot-long north riprap revetment, a 75-foot-long bulkhead, a 20-foot-long bulkhead with 7-foot-long return, a 20-foot-long bulkhead and retaining wall with a 20-foot-long deck on top, a 200-foot-long south riprap revetment, a 136-foot-long by 8-foot-wide floating pier with 5-finger piers and 2 Class B anchor piles, a dual-slip 33 feet by 40 foot open-sided boathouse with 5-foot walkways on both sides. Safety concerns. Reference to the sketch plan view of proposed bulkhead. Encroachment into the channel is as follows. Riprap 12-foot wide plus 40-foot boathouse equals 52 feet. Similarly, the boats tied up on the floating dock will also encroach on the channel as follows. Floating dock 8 foot plus boat 23 foot plus riprap 12 foot plus 18-foot spacing equals 61 feet. In your proposal, Part 3, subsection 2, you indicate 40 feet for the boathouse, 36 foot for the dock without the boat. Each of these will encroach on the 140-foot channel. Where is the 140-foot width of the creek measured? Is it measured where these projections are to be installed? The vegetated area shoals up on the east side of the channel. Was the shoaling taken into consideration? My concern is that jet skis use the passage regularly. I would not want to see someone get hurt due to inadequate space to maneuver. It is my main objection I have with the proposal as presented. As far as encroachment over non-vegetated wetlands is concerned, the area calculated is as follows. Boathouse 33 feet wide times 52 feet long plus pier 136 feet width times 61 feet long equals 10,012 square feet versus the proposal numbers of 1,894 plus 1,320 square feet for a total of 3,214 square feet. This is the minimum amount of encroachment that will exist on the creek attributable to this proposal. Ecological concerns. I assume the north riprap revetment starts at the property line. There are several trees located right along the shore where the north revetment will be installed. What if the trees are removed? Are Bay environmental laws enacted? Aesthetic concerns. Drawing section DD shows the front view of the proposed boathouse. My home is directly opposite the area where the boathouse is planned. The proposal indicates a metal roof. What kind of metal? Is it tin or a copper roof? I would not want to spend my waning years looking at an eyesore. The sidewalls are open, but the ends at the roof line, I assume, are closed. Since this will be up some 20 plus feet, what is planned for the siding? I would want something other than plywood. Technical questions. Drawing section AA plan view of the north revetment does not indicate a slope. I assume it is 2-to-1 as indicated in the plan for the south revetment. Assuming this, you are at a 50% grade. Several years ago, rocks or concrete pieces were installed along the shoreline to stabilize the bank. The revetment is shown idealized, but additional rocks or concrete need to be installed to achieve the desired slope. The creek has been silting, and this will undoubtedly contribute to this occurrence even more. How is this mitigated? Drawing section BB shows the bulkhead, retaining wall, and gravel access area. This was not clear to me. I assume the outboard 20-foot retaining wall will tie into the north revetment. The other 20-foot bulkhead upland will bracket the existing gravel ramp. There is no detail given on either of these structures. other than the sectional view. I assume these will be piles driven into the substrate and covered with boards to make a bulkhead. Please elaborate. The only reference to the 75-foot-long bulkhead is on the proposed overhead view with no detail. What is intended here? Please elaborate. Does this tie into the south revetment? Summary. I am highly concerned about the project's encroachment on the creek and the impact on other traffic using the waterway, such as jet skis. I am concerned about the aesthetic of the boathouse and the impact it has on my property value. I am concerned about the project's effect on the environment with the denuding of vegetation to gain access for the north revetment. While not a concern, I would like information on how the contractor proposes to achieve the idealized slope, as well as the other technical questions I raised. Thank you for any consideration you may give these matters. Sincerely, William J. Snyder.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Need to have some discussion if you care to. If not, we need to have a motion to we continue this deferment and hold the public hearing open. Does anyone have anything they'd like to say?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Sure.
It might be nice to ask the audience if there's anybody here to speak on this
That'd be
matter.
fine.
as
I
well.
assume that there wasn't since it was deferred, but if there is someone here that would like to speak to this, please come forward. Yes, sir.
Just want to be sure, we're clear for the record that Mr. Waltrip has recused himself from this application.
Understood. That's fine, yeah. But that should be in the minutes for sure. Okay, it's up to us.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to defer Wetlands Board Case WJPA 20-0023 at 20 Markley Road.
Chairman?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Thank you. Board considerations. WJPA 19-0023, Uncle's Neck. Have some more time if you need it, Mr. Wilson, to get your papers together. We've got plenty of time. Don't mean to be hurrying you.
No problem, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the board, before you is a wetland permit extension request for permit WJPA 19-0032, VMRC number 19-1124 at 7612 Uncle's Neck. Mr. Wilbur Jordan, on behalf of Ms. Teresa Whelan, has requested a one-year extension to WJPA 19-0032, originally granted on August 14, 2019. Project is scheduled to begin before the end of the calendar year 2020. Staff concurs with this request with the stipulation that all other permit conditions except for the expiration date be reauthorized and that the new date of expiration be August 12, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this matter.
Questions? Care to make a motion, please?
Make a motion to grant the deferment.
Chairman?
All right, Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Thank you. Permit expiration dates. Mr. Wilson, looks like you're back up again.
I don't have a presentation for this. It's just a general discussion. In talking with Mr. Gussman about this, we have several types of different wetland cases that, you know, some are standalone and some are combined with Chesapeake Bay cases. The Chesapeake Bay Act requires a 12-month expiration date. I think it would be wise to allow staff to make the expiration dates for wetland permits dependent upon whether it was standalone and runs with the VMRC permit or whether it was in conjunction with a Chesapeake Bay case and run 1 year concurrent with the Ches Bay case.
Sounds reasonable. Any discussion?
I think it'll be easier for the staff to track them that way. Won't have any confusion with two different dates for projects.
And I did check the bylaws. The bylaws don't make a direct requirement other than all permits must have an expiration date.
We agree on that, or do we have to have a vote?
You don't have to have a vote. That's just a directive you can make towards staff.
That'd be fine, Mr. Wilson. Thank you. That is a special privilege. Anyone have anything they'd like to bring up?
Mr. Chairman, I'm curious to my question, if Mr. Madden is able to address it with regard to maintenance activities that are within our jurisdiction
By all
and
means.
the changes to the law.
So you're curious about how the
As far as our records, so we need a title and name and everything.
Oh, yeah, I beg your pardon. My name's Jeff Madden. I'm with the Marine Resources Commission,
Thank you.
and I represent the commissioner at the hearing. And your question is about whether we have guidance. We've got some guidance. Well, this is a piece of legislation that is very much a very dynamic one and requires a lot of consideration for living shoreline. One of the things in the newly minted legislation is for boards to require individuals requesting permission to do work in your jurisdiction to provide a justification as to why they can't use the living shoreline. So that's one thing that the board requires, the law requires. The second thing is to give greater emphasis to living shorelines. However, there's a caveat there. There's a escape clause, and that is if it is not feasible, the feasibility of it. And in this particular instance, my understanding is that that bank is unstable, quite high. A living shoreline may not necessarily be an appropriate structure for that location, given the depth of the water immediately adjacent to the wetland. I believe it drops off quite deep right there. And as a result, a living shoreline might not be the best solution to address the erosion problem. And I'm sure you have something else.
I do.
Coming, yes.
So in a situation, and this is hypothetical, but not too dissimilar from some that we see, where an individual was putting riprap on top of riprap or fixing a portion of a riprap revetment, an existing revetment that was damaged.
Okay.
Is that same consideration to be given, or is it maintenance at that
Well,
point?
one of the things that if a structure has been damaged during a specific storm, like the one that just ripped through our area and damaged a lot of personal properties and friends that I know, including Royce Bridger, you are allowed through the executive order to, and I can give you a copy of that, to repair a previously permitted structure. The difficulty that we have, and that goes for a bulkhead as well. Certainly we have in the past, and I think we're still going to maintain that if you are going to construct rebuild a bulkhead in the same alignment, it doesn't require additional formal authorization. However, when you top dress with a revetment, you really are changing the slope of the structure. You are significantly changing the angle of repose on the structure. And I have gotten some direction in the past to require or suggest that the wetland boards require a new permit for top dressing of revetment. Because again, you're putting rock on top of rock, and it'll change and usually it ends up in the structure becoming much larger. I developed
Okay,
that.
so you're good there, but in that situation, are we required to consider a living shoreline alternative first before we consider the maintenance?
Yes, and to be consistent with the new law, you need to ask that question. And when you ask the question, why can't you incorporate a living shoreline? We're actually trying to get wetland boards to make that part of their application process. Westmoreland County, for instance, it has a statement in there that says, tell us why you can't use a living shoreline. Northumberland County has what they consider to be their living shoreline addendum, which is a statement that the applicant puts into his submittal package that says why he can't use a living shoreline. And there are a great many instances where a living shoreline wouldn't work. A perfect example is a project up in Westmoreland County, and it's the tallest bulkhead I've ever seen. It's 13 feet high. 13 feet high. And the whole house, the whole property is leaning up against it. And the bottom's getting wormy, so they had to build a bulkhead at the bottom. There's no other way to do it. You couldn't, and it looks right straight out to the Great Wacomico Light. Miles of fetch. It couldn't be done, and it also dropped off. So there's a lot of physical instances where, characteristics where it's not possible. Another one I had last night, heavily overgrown shoreline, and these are mature trees, and they're already limbed up, but they're so dense that you couldn't put a living shoreline in there because nothing would grow down there.
One final question.
Yes, sir.
Is cost part of the feasibility analysis?
Regrettably, no. I believe that might get challenged.
Thank you.
I have one question, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I understood you to say that the applicant must justify why a living shoreline will not work. Is that what you said?
Yes.
I find that, but I think that the applicants are going to be, not exactly sure the right word, but be distressed because they will not have the technical ability to come before the board and explain why the living shoreline will not work. They don't know, and I myself would not understand enough of the technicalities even to write up for an application why a living shoreline would not work. Is the board, are you going to require justification from consultants? How can that carry any weight in the discussion if the applicant doesn't know anything about the requirements of what a living shoreline is?
I brought that very question up,
Okay?
but I'm not a member of the legislature. And that's
I
one
know
of the
you're not, but-
issues that I always had. How are the people going to make this determination?
Right.
Well, the language is ambiguous enough that an individual could really claim I did everything I could think of, and I don't know if it would work. The idea is that the boards need to make that alternative number one.
Yeah, we understand that.
Yeah, I know you do.
But at the same time, practicality and protecting the people that own the property too is important. What would be wrong with if this board so decides after discussion that the county, our engineer, explained to us on behalf of the landowner why the living shoreline would not work? Would that be acceptable?
It certainly would. And remember also that you have the assistance of, you can always ask to get input from VIMS, from Lyle
Here again,
Varnell.
I'm thinking about the landowner wouldn't even know the VIMS existed. I'm trying to be, real world situations talking to you so I can understand
Yes.
myself what's going to happen. And I keep getting back to the fact that our staff, our engineer understands more about what's going on there than, he and the VIM scientists and maybe Mr. Rodley here
Very
to
true.
look at something and decide then and give the board some recommendations.
Also keep in mind that an individual can approach the Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service. It's a free service. Mike Van Landingham. Mike has Mr. Van Landingham's number. They can call Mike. Mike would be happy to go over there.
Did the folks over at Westmoreland, I believe you said, in North, what was the counties that you mentioned?
Westmoreland and
Did
Northumberland.
they put a paragraph like that in their requirement that there is free assistance if they
Yeah.
decide to? That's good, very good. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's always, that's a great resource. And he's
Yes,
on a
yes,
grant,
it
so he
is.
loves to do the work.
And it's something that the landowners would not know about, but now that they have it in writing in the application, they have access to it.
Yes, they do.
That's good,
And you
very
struck
good.
on a very important point. They have access to it. They can always call me too. You know,
Exactly.
always call me at.
Is your name and phone number in the
Yes,
application also?
for the record, it's 757-504-7194. And I'll be happy
appreciate
to
that a
return
lot.
calls
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
anytime.
Was there
for
any
your time.
discussion?
Have I answered all
sorry,
your
sir.
questions to your satisfaction?
One last question, if you would. Was there any discussion around contractors getting certified in the
No.
living shoreline techniques and practices so that they could actually advocate for their client?
That would be-
Whether the living shoreline could work or not work?
That would be really nice, but that's not.
Not in there?
Codified. No, sir. That would be nice if we had a program to qualify agents. It'd be nice if we had
Don't
one
we?
of those programs, but we don't.
I thought we did.
We got a program to certify loggers in the Forest Service.
Agents,
Works very well.
contractors.
Loggers themselves, yeah. Works
Just
very
can't
well.
fund it. You got to be able to fund it. No one will fund it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wilson, we've had anything else you want to bring up? If not, we'll ask for an adjournment to the meeting. Are we okay?
I
Finished with
think
you?
we're good.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Moved.
All right. We are adjourned.
I'd like to call to order the August 12th, 2020 meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rodley,
Here?
Mr. Waltrip,
Here.
Mr. Gussman,
Here.
Mr. Apperson.
Here.
Mr. O'Brien.
Here.
Next order of business are the minutes from the June meeting. We didn't have a meeting last month. Are there any additions, deletions, changes to the minutes? Okay, the minutes stand approved. Next order of business are public hearings. Our first public hearing is CBPA 20-0053 for 146 Red Oak Landing.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner, Stormwater and Resource Protection Division, here to present case CBPA 20-0053, 146 Red Oak Landing. Mr. Don Newsom has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Thomas Tuberville for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall on property located at 146 Red Oak Landing within the Powhatan Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 47301000033. The parcel was originally platted prior to 1990, before the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. And the parcel is outlined in blue here, shown right on Powhatan Creek, across the creek from the landfall subdivision. Total lot size for this property is 1.47 acres, of which 47% is located within the RPA. The applicant has expressed concern for erosion in the side yard near an existing shed, and for this reason is proposing to construct a 65 square foot retaining wall in order to prevent future erosion. The required amount of mitigation for this amount of impervious cover is 3 shrubs. The project location here, the aerial photograph. Topography of the site. Again, this shoreline has been regraded in the past. Floodplain as it impacts this property. It is in the AE zone and it has a base flood elevation of 7 feet mean sea level. The RPA as it impacts this property. And then from the application, the 100-foot RPA buffer and the proposed retaining wall. Staff's evaluated the application and the exception request for the construction of the retaining wall. The application does meet ordinance conditions in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard before the board because the retaining wall is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23.7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief, and granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purposes and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will provide or prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Couple site photographs. The wall would be in this area here. This area here. And in this area here. Staff does recommend approval. It is our view that the application does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented. Should the board find that the exception request meets all 5 of those conditions, staff does suggest these following conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. That any development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, the floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance, and receive all required approvals and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. That a surety of $250 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. That a mitigation plan equating to the planting of 3 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. The surety will be returned once the mitigation has been planted and approved. That the exception request shall become null and void if construction is not begun by August 12, 2021, and that written request for an extension to the exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater Resource Protection Division no later than July 1, 2021. 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this exception request.
Any questions?
Mr. Wilson, is the site experiencing erosion?
It is in that one corner at the upslope side of that shed. Mr. Don Newsom is here tonight and he could speak to that matter as well.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions for staff. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? Okay, please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. I'm Don Newsom with Delightful Gardens Landscape Company. Our address is 7242 Merrimack Trail right here in Williamsburg. I don't have a whole lot to add. I would tell you that it's a concrete block, so it's a permanent solution. And in addition, we're planning on putting stone on filter cloth between the wall and the adjacent building to further help stabilize the situation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
I was really just curious about the amount of erosion that, sediment loss that you're experiencing that's,
There is some because it's a very steep drop off in that area. Most of the water actually heads towards the creek. There's a large area, I'm rabbit trailing a little bit, but there's a large area underneath an oak tree where grass is not sustainable. And I have recommended to my customer that we mulch that with pine needles. That'll probably do as much or more for stabilizing the soil in that area actually as a retaining wall.
so the retaining wall isn't needed?
No, it's needed. There's soil headed towards the that you see there. But the watershed area under the oak tree is much bigger. It's huge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? This time I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Yes, sir.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion? Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the board adopt CBPA 20-0053, 146 Red Oak Landing retaining wall.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for CBPA 20-0053. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries and the exception is granted. That was our only public hearing for tonight. We have two matters for board consideration. The first is an extension request for CBPA 19-0087.
Evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Before you tonight is a exception request extension. Mr. Wilbur Jordan, on behalf of Ms. Teresa Whelan, is requesting a one-year extension to CBPA 19-0087, originally granted on August 14, 2019. Project is scheduled to begin before the end of the calendar year 2020. Staff concurs with this request with the stipulation that all permit conditions except for the expiration date be reauthorized and that the new date of expiration be August 12, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions for staff? Okay, can we have a motion?
Chairman, I move that we grant the extension request.
We have a vote, please.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Our next item under board consideration is an appeal, but before we begin this, I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess. Any objections from the board? Okay, we'll resume at 7 minutes of. Okay, we're back in session, and we're going to continue with board considerations. And our next item is an appeal regarding 4720 Yeardley Loop. Mr. Wilson, will you start with your presentation?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the board, before you tonight are two appeals, one from a homeowner at 4720 Yardley Loop, and the other from the homeowners association, the Point Homes Association, for the same issue. Before we start, just want to go through some general rules, because we usually we don't do this very often. I'm going to go ahead and give staff's presentation. Board may ask me questions, and I'll answer them to the best of my abilities. Then the property owner at 4720, Mr. Richard Castle, will stand up and he'll be allowed to speak. The board may ask him questions. And then finally, the HOA representative, Mr. Sleeth, give a presentation, and the board may ask him questions. At which point in time, if there's follow-up or clarifications needed, I'll stand up, get through this process. So with that, I would like to present the notice of violation that was sent to first the Point Homes Association, and then sent to Mr. Richard Castle. So they are both appealing their individual notices of violations on the HOA property behind 4720 Yardley Loop within the natural open space easement in the Phase 2B Point of Jamestown subdivision. What has occurred, and staff was alerted to this in April, was some unauthorized tree clearing and removal in the natural open space easement, which is HOA property behind 4720 Yardley Loop. Staff did go out and investigate, got some pictures, sent notice of violation to the HOA. Staff, the county had the wrong HOA address on file, on record. So that went unanswered for a period of time. Figured out that the address was wrong, resent the notice of violation, gave the HOA an extension on the 30-day deadline that is standard in all our notice of violations. Mr. Castle was also sent a notice of violation a little bit later. He appealed, he and his wife did appeal that within the required 30 days. So the area of violation is shown here, directly behind 4720 Yardley Loop. The recorded plat shows this area to be a natural open space easement dedicated to James City County. This plat was recorded October 30th, 2008. And this dimension down here at the bottom of the plat, although it's unreadable on your screens, is 107 feet. So that buffer, or that property width, is 107 feet behind all of these properties on Yardley Loop. This property to the left is Mainland Farm. There's the third sheet of the recorded plat. The easement, the deed of easement for natural open space that was recorded at the same time, October 30th, 2008, was put in place for stormwater purposes. And condition number 4 of the easement here, highlighted, says that the easement shall remain in its natural condition with respect to natural leaf litter, understory, and tree canopy vegetation. And it says some other things in there. I shortened it down for presentation purposes. Some site photographs taken on April 24th, 2020. All these photographs are taken on HOA property. They do appear dark on here. I hope that on your monitors that they're a little clearer. They were on my computer monitor. These two photographs, this one is looking to the east, and this one is significant in that if you look further into the buffer, you'll see that it is heavily wooded. And then this one is from the edge of the clearing looking back at 4720. And this is also taken from that eastern section looking at the western edge of the clearing. And again, I want to show you the heavy tree canopy that exists in the buffer, the remaining buffer. Also want to point out these white PVC pipes. Mr. Castle did plant some small trees in there. And while I don't know if he planted this grass or not, there is certainly grass growing in the easement now. So just want to give a little more background information. Mr. Richard Castle is the owner of property located at 4720 Yardley Loop. Mr. William Sleeth III is representing the Points Home Association. Both of those gentlemen will be speaking. The Castles bought their property from the developer, Hampton Roads Development. The Point Homes Association is the owner of the JCC parcel identified as 464060000E, which has a mailing address of 4732 Yardley Loop and is where the violation has occurred. Photographs do show fresh cut stumps and logs in the area behind 4720 Yardley Loop. That the developer recorded the deed of easement for the natural open space on October 30th, 2008. In our notice of violation, to remedy the violation, staff said the following actions must be taken: that all improvements to the property must be removed. And what that staff means there are those trees that were planted and the grass. Those trees, I believe, were fruit trees. They're not native to the buffer. The disturbed area must be replanted with 30 loblolly pines in the 6 to 8 foot in height range, and that there's a payment of a one-time civil charge of $5,000 to the county. Staff's guidance, before we get there, the civil charge was determined using our standard matrix. Water quality impact, minor, moderate, significant on the one axis, and degree of noncompliance, minor, moderate, or major on the other axis. And that axis was determined to be at 5,000. Staff guidance to the board from section 2317B from the ordinance, the Chesapeake Bay ordinance. The board shall balance the hardship to the property owner with the purpose, intent, and objectives of the chapter. The board shall not decide in favor of the appellant unless it finds that the hardship is not generally shared by the other properties in the area. The Chesapeake Bay, its tributaries, and other properties in the vicinity will not be adversely affected. And the appellant acquired the property in good faith and the hardship is not self-inflicted. That ends my presentation on this violation. I would suggest to the board that there are 2 appeals, so this last part would apply to both Mr. Castle and to the Point Homes Association separately. Just wanted to be clear in that. Board can decide to uphold. I've written resolutions to uphold the appeals for both appellants and to deny the appeal for both appellants, and in whatever form or fashion the board may decide. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board have on this matter.
Any questions from the board at this time? And we'll have a chance to question the board again later.
I do have a question, if I may.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson, I noted that there are 2 appellants, and is it your position that your recommendations are individual for each or total? That's
My recommendation is separate, but if
so the total fine in this case would be $10,000.
it could be,
Double
if that's the
charge.
way the board wanted to go with
I
that.
meant your recommendation.
Yes, I mean, by the way the appeals are written up, that is correct.
And then, just for clarity, when these open space easements are incorporated into the county's decision-making for stormwater management, is it to offset pollutant load that would otherwise be treated with a best management practice, more conventional best management practice, or is it bonus?
No, it's used, in this particular case, it was used to offset conventional BMPs for that portion of the property. So there are significant water quality benefits to be seen with the creation of the natural open space easements.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this time, I'd like to call the first appellant, Mr. Richard Castle. Would you come forward and state your name for the record and your address?
Hello, my name is Monica Castle. I'm up here today because my husband is having chest pains and is not able to, he doesn't feel comfortable speaking. He's not feeling well.
My name is Richard Castle.
Okay. Wish to address the board?
I do wish to address the board. Part of the matter that I would like to talk to the board about is we had neighbors at 4712 Yearly Loop also receive a notice of violation. They had brought in a backhoe into that lot, and they had a zip line, they had children playing back there, a bike ramp, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I understand they had a notice of violation, but they were told that they did not have to worry about any fine or anything like that. They settled the matter by clearing out the stuff. And before we go into the he said, she says, I would like to know if we could consider that.
Okay, we'll make a note of it.
Okay.
Now, in regard to the clearing behind your house, what?
Well, we're not the owner of that property there in that easement. And you can see by the things that he put up, our property line is inside of that easement. Now, he talks about grass being planted there. When our fence was installed, when we first purchased our home, we requested our fence be put in at least 3 feet from the property line so that we would have the ability all the way around us to maintain our fence. Okay, so the grassy area, and you can see it in this photograph.
Okay,
Do you want me to bring it to you, or?
okay, any photographs or documents that you show us, you have to leave with us. They
Okay, well,
become
they
part of
came-
the
they
official
came
record.
From Mr. Wilson in the complaint.
Okay,
So our property is within that line, and where we have grass planted back there is technically our property. So, as far as what happened with the trees there, we have lived at that property for 7 years on July 8th. When we first bought the house, the builder at that time did clear some trees to make it more accessible to the lot or whatever, put up a fence, I'm not sure. The homeowners association at that time was United Property Associates, and it wasn't the CBM people that are now Chesapeake Bay Management. We don't know who cut these trees down. We do know we've had hundreds and hundreds of people go through that property as a cut through because there's a trail back there. We've also had the farmer, like when trees are knocked down or whatever, he takes and puts them on our side of the property. We're aware of that. It's been going on for years and years and years. We've never felt the need. We did call UPA when we first had trees down and saw that some had been cut. We did let them know, and they told us it was not their problem, is basically what they told us. Additionally, we've had, since the COVID-19, we've had many, many people out walking and being in the field. We've had lots of people trespassing through our yard. There's no easement on either side of our yard for access to the trails. There is an easement at 4724, okay, but not on our property line. And there was some controversy with the person at 4724 putting up no trespassing signs, which I believe is probably what started most of this. Unfortunately, and it's a sad situation to say, we feel like we're being targeted by the homeowners association and some of the people that work there. My husband will be 75 years old. He's not out there cutting down trees. He's a heart patient. He has severe arthritis in both of his shoulders, his knees, that he's on morphine for most of the time. We don't have any ability to do that. We don't even have the ability to mow our own lawn. We have to pay somebody to do that. I'm not sure, do you have any questions?
yes, I do. I just want to remind everyone that this is a legal proceeding and it's being recorded. So, answer all questions from the board truthfully and completely, because anything you say, your statements, will be part of the legal record. And a transcript will probably be made of the proceedings tonight. So let me just ask you for the record, did either of you cut down any of the trees in the back there?
No, sir.
Did you hire anyone to cut down the trees?
No, sir.
Do you know who cut down the trees, any of the trees?
No, sir.
I had put a trail camera on the back of my shed to try to find out who was back there. I only heard from two of the walkers one day that this little boy and little girl were walking and playing in the woods, and a tree fell between them both and hurt them. And they said that the father was very mad. And something about he might possibly be the one that came down and did what we see back there.
But we have no idea who it might have been, and that's basically just hearsay.
Okay. What about the fruit trees? Did you plant the fruit trees?
We did plant the fruit
Okay.
trees. We were trying to get our green space, because we did like the green space, which is partially why we purchased the home.
We had 5.
But we've since taken them out of there.
Okay.
I had a,
Any other questions from the
just
board?
one.
Go ahead.
One quick question. So when we speak of the improvements to that area, is it just the fruit trees or are there other things?
As far as there were, right at the edge of where our grass is, we had planted some crepe myrtle trees because so much of the buffer was gone. People were staring in our backyard and our back window. So much of the buffer was gone, we thought, well, we'd at least put some crepe myrtles and a dogwood there to try and get a little bit of a screening. From what I'm understanding, that was in that easement area. And we have removed all of those trees, including the fruit trees.
To your knowledge, do you know why the trees were cut?
No, sir, I have no idea, other than, we have had several neighbors coming over and getting firewood for their fire pits. Matter of fact, one of the ladies, her husband and kids, we came home one day to find them back there taking logs, I'm assuming for a fire pit, and they burnt, 2 days later, the burned logs were returned. I'm sorry, what other questions may you have?
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to call Mr. William Sleeth, Esquire, on behalf of the Point Homes Association.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to address the group. For the record, my name is William Sleeth. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Gordon & Reese here in town. Our office is right here in Newtown. I serve as legal counsel to the Point Homes Association, which is the residential homeowners association for the neighborhood. I focus a sizable amount of my practice on representing homeowners associations. I represent about 100 all throughout the state. And so this matter first came to my attention a few months ago when the association contacted me and said, we received this notice from the county. And I said, how did this come up? And one of the board members said, well, we noticed trees on the common area that were cut down, so we reported it to the county. And I think that's really important for the board to keep in mind, because the homeowners association is the one who brought this issue to the county's attention, which is why we're here. And so I'd ask the board to keep in mind, if this was the homeowners association that cut down the trees, why on earth would they report it to the county, right? So that's the first point that I'd ask to keep in mind. When it happened, I conducted an investigation and I spoke to numerous people involved in the homeowners association. I spoke to all of the members in the homeowners association board of directors. They have a board of directors that's elected by the members. I spoke to several community managers. The community is managed by Chesapeake Bay Management Incorporated, which is a very well-respected regional community management firm with offices all throughout Hampton Roads. I spoke to Jennifer Smith, who's here in the audience. She was the community manager for several years. I spoke to the present community manager, which is a woman named Tabitha Clark, who took over after Ms. Smith would transition to managing the Colonial Heritage neighborhood. And I asked all of them, I said, what do you know about this? And universally, they said, we know nothing about it. We have no idea who did this, but what's clear is the homeowners association had nothing to do with it. The homeowners association had no involvement in it. They don't know who did this. And in fact, the homeowners association is very angry about this because someone trespassed on the homeowners association property and destroyed the homeowners association property. So the board is very frustrated about this situation. So Because the homeowners association is an incorporated entity under Virginia law and it's licensed by the Virginia Common Interest Community Board, it's subject to several legal regimes, including the Virginia Non-Stock Corporation Act, as well as the Virginia Property Owners Association Act, as well as the jurisdiction of the Virginia Common Interest Community Board. And by virtue of that, that imposes numerous restrictions on what the homeowners association can and cannot do with its operations. So here's an example. The homeowners association, if it's going to contract with a party, it has to bid out that contract. I asked the homeowners association, I asked Ms. Smith to go back and search all the records and the board to search all the records. I said, do you have any records in your corporate files of ever bidding out any sort of contract to have trees removed from the common area? Ever. And they looked at the historic files from Chesapeake Bay Management, and they also looked at the historic files from UPA, which is United Property Associates, which was the prior community manager that you heard Mr. Cassell allude to. So just by way of background, the developer created the point, and it's my understanding the first property management company was United Property Associates, then Chesapeake Bay Management. When Chesapeake Bay Management took over the management duties, UPA transferred their files to Chesapeake Bay Management. So I had the association go back and review all of the UPA files. I said, did you find anything in here about bidding out a contract for tree removal? They said, no, there's nothing there. I said, please look at all the meeting minutes from the start of the association. Check every single set of meeting minutes. See if there's any mention of cutting down trees in there. And there was nothing. I said, check if there's even any mention of trees at all, separate and apart from cutting them down, just anything about trees back there at that spot. There was nothing there. So the Homeowners Association's records show nothing about this. Why is this important? Because the association legally can't take action unless it's bidding out contracts and documenting it in the minutes. Just like Ms. Barman here, if something happens, she's going to document it in the minutes. There's none of that. And that's because the Homeowners Association had nothing to do with this. They don't know who did it, and they're quite candidly very frustrated, and we would submit that it would be very unfair to fine the Homeowners Association and force them to maintain this cost for something that occurred from someone else trespassing on their property and, in fact, destroying their property. Now, I don't know who did this. The Homeowners Association doesn't know. But I want to take about 2 minutes to suggest why I think it may be a reasonable thing to presume that the lot that backs up to this may have had a role in this. You saw the pictures from Mr. Wilson, and what they showed was, they showed that a view was created by the trees being cut down. Now, I've been involved in a lot of these matters representing homeowners associations. I know this is often about a view. Usually it's a view to water, right? We don't have water here, but what do we have through the woods here? We have a nice farm, a lot of open space here. So when these trees were cut down, 4720 suddenly had a pretty nice view out to a farm that no one else on that road had. There were pictures that Mr. Wilson showed of log piles right behind 4720, sitting in the common area. I spoke to members of the board, the directors of the Point Homeowners Association, who told me that the Castles offered logs to them for firewood. You heard the Castles allude to this. So the Castles had involvement with the logs that were sitting back there. I talked to the board. They said there's a picnic bench that sits directly behind the Castles lot back there. I want to draw the board's attention to a letter Mr. Castle sent as part of his appeal notice. And I have copies for everyone. I'm happy to pass these around. There's 5 there. Thank you. Now, this is the letter that the castle sent in to the county when they appealed, and this was provided to me by Mr. Wilson and Ms. Parman. And I've highlighted a few key statements that I want to walk the board through. One statement there talks about how the castles planted 6 trees on the common area. That's the type of action that someone would take as if that person thought that they had the authority to go on there and act like it was theirs and do what they wanted. The letter also says, we planted and have watered and cares for the trees. Again, it shows involvement by the Cassells with what's going on in that common area. The letter talks about planting 2 cherry trees so the animals can enjoy the fruits. So clearly there was a concern, a significant concern about the condition of this common area relating to cherry trees. Are the animals enjoying it back there? And later in the letter, what do the Cassells say about the need for new trees? We'll order new pines. On the second page, they say it right there. Oh, we have to plant new trees. We'll order new pines. Now, who agrees to order new trees unless you feel a sense of responsibility for what transpired? So what I want to suggest to the board is this. If the Cassells planted trees in the common area, watered the common area, cared for the common area, made other plantings in the common area, wanted the animals to enjoy the common area, kept piles of logs in the common area, and said they'd be willing to plant new trees in the common area, I think this suggests a high degree of involvement and concern about that common area by the Cassells, the result of which opened up a very nice view for them to the farm. And I think a reasonable inference can be drawn from all of this, that the Cassells likely had a role in taking down the trees from the common area. So what I'm asking the board to do is respectfully rule that the association had no involvement in this. I don't believe there's been any evidence presented that the association did have any involvement in the trees coming down. I think the undisputed evidence shows the association's really frustrated about it and mad that someone trespassed and destroyed their property. So I'd ask that the board respectfully grant the association's appeal and rule that the association does not have to have a fine and that the association does not have to plant the new trees. We have an easy solution. Mr. Castle right there said in writing he'd be willing to plant the trees again. So that's what I have to say. Now, Mr. Wilson brought up the standards under the ordinance, and I just want to briefly touch on them as well. I have a copy. Ordinance. The ordinance talks about hardship. Will the Chesapeake Bay and tributaries be affected and the appellant acquired the property in good faith? So I just want to very briefly go through these standards. The first is the hardship is not generally shared by the properties in this area. I'd submit that it's the association here that's really been forced into a hardship position because, again, they didn't do this, and someone trespassed on the property, cut down the trees, and now we're stuck in this dilemma. So I would submit that under that factor, it wouldn't be appropriate for the association to have to bear this hardship of being forced to pay for what it didn't do. Now, the second factor talks about the effect on the bay and its tributaries. And there's already been evidence put before the board here that trees will be replanted. Mr. Castle's volunteered to replant those trees. So I'd submit that under that rationale, that there will not be those adverse effects on the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. And then the third factor is the appellant acquired the property in good faith and the hardship's not inflicted. I think we've shown evidence of that. The homeowners association acquired the property from the developer in good faith. Legally, under county and as well as Virginia law, the homeowners association didn't have a choice. It had to accept ownership of the common area. And the hardship wasn't self-inflicted. The association's frustrated about this. They've had to pay me good money to show up here and try and appeal this. So they would never inflict this on themselves. So I know I've been doing a lot of talking. I appreciate your consideration, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
You said you did a bit of research. Did you contact the adjacent the property owners adjacent to 4720 Yeardley Loop, the adjacent houses, and ask them if they were aware of who cut down the trees?
There was some efforts to try to get to the bottom of that, and I have several directors from the board here, if the board would like to hear from them. At the same time that this became an issue at 4720, there was also an issue at 4712. And again, the homeowners association reported this to the county.
Yeah, we're aware of that, but
right.
my question is,
Yes.
were the adjacent homes, homeowners question about, did they know who cut it down? Did they see anyone? It's pretty hard to cut down 30 trees with a chainsaw in a subdivision without somebody hearing it.
Yeah. Personally, I don't know if it's okay.
You're going to have to come up and state your name and address for the record and speak clearly into the microphone. If you would like, you can remove your mask at this time.
Hi, I'm Margot Zeckman. I'm the treasurer of the HOA at the Point at Jamestown. I live at 4731 Yeardley Loop, across the street from the Gazelles. We did not, the HOA didn't contact the neighbors on either side to find out. We don't know who cut them down. We just know that they're behind this property. And that was the only thing that we have to go on. So no, we didn't.
Did any other property on sides, right or left, cut on any?
I don't know if it went as far into the other side. There may have been some on the, I don't know the address, but if you're facing the Cassell's on the right-hand side of their house, there may have been some trees down in that, behind that lot too, in the easement.
One other question. Do you know when these trees were cut?
No.
Know whether a storm, these look like all pine trees. Do you know if a storm damaged these trees, the reason why they were removed and cut?
I mean, we've had trees that have come down back there, certainly during storms, because neighbors will report to the HOA that trees have come down in their fences and stuff. And in fact, I think last year during some of the storms, the property at 4724 had a tree come down on their fence and take it out. So they contacted the HOA to ask who was responsible for that. And so they do come down during the storms, but just given the evidence of like the logs and stuff, I don't know if they came down naturally. I don't think that many would have come down in a storm, certainly without the HOA being made aware of it, because usually it comes down in somebody's property and they contact us to have them removed, so.
Just a point of clarification, you indicated that the homeowners association notified the county of this issue, this violation. I thought I read somewhere where it was an anonymous source.
I can speak to that. So the day that this happened, myself, my husband, my family went on a walk. I'm the treasurer of the HOA board. And as the Cassell said, that is a cut through. A lot of people cut through there. We were uncertain of what side the easement was on. That's what we were trying to get to. So we came through there. It was at that time that I noticed how many trees were down, you know, and it was a huge clearing. And so I brought it up in a board meeting to the other board members. We weren't certain, the board was not certain of who the actual property belonged to, who was responsible for the property. Because of this like kind of James City County HOA kind of situation. So I reached out to the county and I said, at these addresses, it's a big clearing. I don't know if this is James City County property or the HOA property. I think that was the time when Michael went out and took a look, and then that's how that came. The anonymous source came from, I think, the property that was reported down the street. There was another property that had some infractions as well with the zip line and that sort of stuff. And I think that was reported by another neighbor or someone from another neighborhood.
Further questions? Thank you. Okay, thank you both. All right, at this time, we're going to go back to Mr. Wilson and allow Mr. Wilson to respond to some of the issues that were raised. And I'd like to repeat Larry's question about were any trees on the adjacent properties cut down, or is this almost all exactly behind 4720?
This particular violation to the naked eye is immediately behind 4720.
Okay.
Reference was made to a violation at 4712, and I would like to address the board on that issue. Although it's not part of this hearing, I want to just clear things up for the record. Both properties were reported by multiple people in early April as having violations. We did send a notice of violation to 4712 as well, and they submitted documentation back to the county that they had not done the clearing, but they had asked the developer prior to their sale of their house to remove some of those trees, and had documentation from the bill of sale and photographs dated back. So the developer dedicates this open space easement and then proceeds to violate it, and it's 12 years later and they're long gone. So the county we don't have any recourse in that case. So we have asked 4712 to remove the improvements they put in place, including a zip line, and they had made a little dirt bike trail back there. And while we haven't gone back to verify that those things have been removed, they have indicated that it had been removed and they will stop maintaining that area. So back to 4720. To answer Mr. Waltrip's question again, it appears to the naked eye that it is immediately behind their property. I'm not going to swear that that some trees weren't cut on, behind the other properties, but.
Okay. Do you have anything, any other responses to some of the comments that you've heard?
No, just the clarification on 4712 is the one big item I wanted to point out, and also the fact that there were multiple complainants, not just the HOA.
So just to clarify that one more time, you received your first notice of violations from a representative from the homeowners association or from another anonymous source?
First one came from the HOA. The second one, a day later, came from a different community.
It's hard for me to believe that all that power saw down in those trees, that somebody wouldn't see or know something. Trees down.
Mr. Wilson, in your practice, in your current role, when you have a violation on a property, who do you look to remedy that violation usually?
We always go after the property owner.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Wilson? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Cassell, Mr. and Mrs. Cassell, would you like to respond to any remarks? Then please come forward again.
Thank you. The only remark I would like to, well, one of the remarks I would like to respond to is Ms. Zeckman's statement. She was, her family and her children and her husband were back behind that property and took logs from that property. We came home and found them running along the side of our fence to take the logs. So the first time she saw the opening, or whatever she's calling it, was not this spring.
Okay. That's okay. They could, but we'll have to keep them.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, they're part of the official record now.
And those are some of the more recent, and that's what the property looks like today. So there's no, so-called picnic table or anything else back there.
A lot of those trees snapped in half. We saw a lot of them like that over a period of years, and apparently one fell across the trail, if you will, where people walk, and that's where the farmer came down and used his scoop or something to push it back in, but.
And the only other thing I would mention is that I did reach out to both Mr. Hamilton, the Homeowners Association president, and to Tabitha Clark of CMB, asking when the last neighborhood inspection was. Because prior to this, I had understood we were supposed to have quarterly inspections. And she said the last one they had was somewhere in February, but she didn't have the notes on anything that was going on past then.
Okay.
Did you have any, I really take issue with the attorney saying that because I was willing to plant trees, that I was automatically guilty of doing something. No, I'm a big tree lover. I'm a member of the Arbor Day Foundation. We have lots of trees in our yard, and I happen to provide, homes and bird houses for birds, and trees are needed. And we were losing the privacy to our home with these trees that were being cut down.
Okay.
Trees that we agreed to purchase were only
Yeah, we can't,
2-foot trees that we could water, and hopefully they would survive, but
right.
we don't have the money. 30 of them. And,
Or the ability
and
to
where they come up with
plant them.
30 trees. I only saw like 17 stumps down. But the only thing along with that, the second day we moved into the house, we had our back fence up. There was a limb on the fence, and we went across to the homeowners association,
No,
to the realtor.
Realtor, yeah, because they were still
And we
inside.
explained it to them, and they said they would take care of it, so
That's all that we know
that's
about.
all we know.
Do you have any other questions for us?
No. Anyone else from the board?
Just
Okay,
real quick.
Thank you very much.
I had one real quick one. The statement about you offering the logs for sale, did you respond to that? Mr. Sleeth mentioned that.
We do not.
You didn't,
No, we've never done that. We've never offered them for sale. We've never offered them for giveaway. Like I said, the only ones we've ever seen back there taking logs are the Zeckmans.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Sleeth, you have any final comments for us?
Very briefly, sir, I'd ask if Jennifer Smith, the community manager, could speak for just about a minute about her experience in managing the community and advising the board, and also her knowledge about the importance of this issue.
And please state your full name and address for the record.
My full name is Jennifer Smith, and my address, you want my home address or work address?
How about work address?
603 Pilot House Drive, Suite 300, Newport News, Virginia, 23606.
Thank you.
I've been in the association management industry almost half of my adult life now, close to 20 years. And in that experience and in working in the greater James City County area for a number of years, I'm aware of the county's policy of, removing trees from certain protected areas and the process that that has to go through. I've seen what can happen when other communities don't follow those guidelines, so I know that there are severe consequences if that process is not followed. So under my management of the point at Jamestown, if the board, wanted to go through that undertaking to remove trees from a protected area, I would have advised them to go through the county policy and to get that permission before any trees are removed from a protected area. But that topic was never a topic of discussion, so we didn't have to have that conversation with the board of directors.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Thank
you. Okay. All right. Let me see, at this time,
Mr. Chairman, when it's appropriate, I have some additional questions for staff.
okay. That's fine, go ahead.
Mr. Wilson, in your opinion, obviously the trees have come down, but how is the land itself? Is it eroding? Is there anything detrimental that you're seeing that would contribute to degraded water quality?
The area in question is extremely flat. The lack of, or the loss of canopy cover has prompted a lot of herbaceous growth. So on the surrounding properties where the canopy is really dense, it's pine duff and hardly any vegetation on the ground at all. So when they were first removed, I would suggest that there was erosion going on, but it probably has abated itself over the course of the summer with the growth of the herbaceous materials.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Parman, can I get your advice and help here?
Certainly.
I don't see in my board book a motion that we have to make. And I mean, this is a really first-time procedure for us in a long time. Do we have an open discussion now? Can we have an open discussion from the board?
Yes, I'd recommend having a discussion. And there's
Okay.
a number of decisions you can make here. Obviously, you can hold one, both, or neither of the parties responsible. You can adopt the recommendations of staff in the violation. You can change those conditions as
Ms.
well.
Parman, can you come up and
Sorry.
speak so everything is caught in on the record?
Yes, thank you. I'm Liz Parman, Assistant County Attorney. So you first asked what the procedure is here. I'd recommend having a discussion amongst the board members. And there's a number of decisions you can make here. You can hold either party responsible. You could hold neither party responsible here, or you can hold them jointly responsible. Now, staff made recommendations in the notice of violation, essentially for what the penalty should be. And that was replanting trees and a civil penalty of $5,000. Now, you can alter those recommendations as well. So you have a number of options on the table here. After your discussion, I'd recommend that you decide each matter separately. Obviously, one will influence the other, but it is two separate appeals.
Okay, stay up there for a second. Can the board go into a closed session for their discussion?
No, you cannot.
Not, okay, well, that answers that one.
Can I ask a question about the penalty? Can that be considered a surety instead?
Yes, you can do that. You can waive the penalty. You can acquire it as a surety instead of a fine. You can attach whatever conditions you feel are appropriate.
Okay, all right. Stay on board. We may have some more questions. This is pretty unique for us.
It is.
I'm going to start off the board discussion and throw out my thoughts, but I'll let you know what I'm thinking. But I certainly, my mind will be changed by what your thoughts are. Somebody cut down those trees, and I can't believe nobody heard that chainsaw out there. Boy, I know my sleep has been interrupted many Sunday mornings by chainsaws in my neighborhood. Mr. and Mrs. Cassell, they answered pretty unequivocally they did not cut down these trees. I have not seen any evidence presented to us to indicate that they cut down those trees or that they hired someone to cut down those trees. In the absence of any evidence, I take them at their word that they didn't cut them down. The offer, if I knew trees were cut down, I might offer to replant them even though it wasn't on my property as well. The homeowners association is the owner of the property, and they're responsible for what goes on their property, regardless whose house it's behind. Homeowners associations have an obligation to inform their members that they can't do certain things on the homeowners association property. Not just inform them that, to beat it into their heads and warn them that there are ramifications and that and they have a responsibility for doing inspections, and if they see violations of the homeowners' rules, they have to take they are the responsible ones for taking action. So in terms of the responsibility here, I feel that the homeowners association should be held responsible. But I certainly want to hear the thoughts of the other board members.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll speak. My question was leading to your point about the HOA's responsibility for the property that they own. But also in this case, again, to echo your point about not knowing who cut the trees, because that is a lot of tree cutting back there. But I'm looking more to the resource than I am to the penalty. So my thoughts drift to, and I'll let Mr. Apperson speak to this as a forester, you know, you could bomb that with pine sprigs potentially and get rapid growth, pine grow very quickly in Virginia, and get the restoration of tree canopy in the next 5 to 10 years, you know, in a fairly expedient manner. And I think that to me is more important than the fines.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly in agreement with that. And I certainly understand Mr. Sleeth's argument, you know, that I do not believe that the homeowners association did this willfully. But a member of the group, I believe, probably did do it. I'm more interested in the environmental restoration. I want to see it replanted. I want to see it return to its natural state. In this case, since we can't identify the individuals responsible, I'm willing to forego the penalty as long as the restoration work is done in a timely manner. And by that I mean that the homeowners association undertakes the work in a timely manner. In a timely manner. I'm willing to forego the penalty in that case. I do feel this is a very serious case. If we don't order the restoration, there's going to be a lot of people out there chopping down a lot of trees, and then there will be some significant environmental damage. So I view this as a serious case. But I'm willing, if we can get a quick restoration, and I'll let Mr. Apperson address whether he thinks it can happen pretty quickly.
I would be glad to go out and take a look at it and give Michael some recommendations based on experiences that I had in that area. I know about this planting. I planted those trees when Al White owned the property. Al White was going to grow Christmas trees, and he made farming, let the trees go. So he never cut one. And they're white pine. They're not loblolly pine. I'd be glad to do. At the same time, I have no problem with not charging anybody for this. Somebody got cut, got caught cleaning out their backyard. It's pretty simple. You can't even move equipment there, trucks and whatever you need to get the power saws out. That's parking in somebody's yard or driveway or something. I mean, whoever cut the trees, the people who live there know how they got cut. I'm not particularly interested in any fines. I would just like to have the area restored. I think everybody's a little bit guilty and everybody's a little bit innocent. I would love to make some recommendations to the county engineer on how to get it back into a vegetative state rapidly and inexpensively and sensibly, and something that'll last for another 100 years.
I am always so grateful to have Mr. Apperson on our board. He knows the whole history of every plot of land in the county,
Not all
of
of them,
when things were planted and who owned it, and I'm amazed by his knowledge of the county. Any other comments, discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. O'Brien made a recommendation that in lieu of the civil charge, that perhaps the surety could be held to guarantee the success.
And that surety should come from the owner of the property.
I think the damage has been done, and now looking at the restoration of the property to get it back in shape, the property doesn't look that bad. As far as the planting the fruit trees, the cherry trees and stuff back, I can understand. I think I would probably do it too if to make the property look a little bit better. I don't think that they are able to go out there and cut those trees. Take them at their word of what they said, and as far as the homeowners, I don't think the homeowners probably knew too much about it either. Maybe somebody did, I don't know, but nobody can put their finger on it. So based on that, we really don't know who cut them, and we really can't make a call on that. So the best thing to do is get the property back in shape with whatever needs to be done, and I can't see a fine or penalty placed on either party personally.
It would be all right. I would suggest that we go back with the natural vegetation. The fruit trees, they have a brief existence and they're attractive for 1 week of the year, but they're actually drains on the environmental system.
Well, I think the people who put them in there just did that because they might not have known
I can take them
really
out
what the
would be one of my
situation was.
recommendations.
It has to,
But the guidance from your standpoint would put that back into perspective, and that's what I'm
okay,
saying.
but you could provide the advice on what would be considered natural vegetation. It has to be returned to natural vegetation. Ms. Parman, again, so if I understand it now, what are we issuing at this point?
So from your discussion, it sounds as if you'd like to grant Mr. Cassell's appeal, essentially not requiring that he take any action, absolving the violation. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. Is that the feeling of the board? Okay. Yes, so we're going to grant Mr. Cassell's appeal.
Okay, so that would be the first motion.
Okay. Motion to grant Mr. Cassell's appeal, okay, well, we would vote on that. And then the second motion would be to,
Deny the homeowners, the Point Homes Association appeal, but modify the conditions recommended by the county.
okay, deny their appeal, but modify the the county's, what is it?
The conditions.
The county's
in the violation.
condition requiring a penalty, and in its place require surety for the return of the natural vegetation.
Yes.
Is that the sense of the board?
Sounds like.
Yeah, and there was a third provision, which I don't think is applicable anymore, having to do with the improvements.
Right, there was a condition to remove the improvements, and
Haven't they been removed?
it sounds as
So is
if
that moot?
we've all heard evidence that they had been,
Well,
so.
if we want the improvements removed,
Oh, the man-made improvements.
the man-made improvements removed, the fruit trees out, does that mean we have to deny their appeal, or is there?
Are you talking about the Cassell's appeal?
Yes.
No, you can still grant their appeal if you're satisfied that.
And who, okay, but who are we requiring to remove the man-made improvements?
You can remove that requirement completely.
I think the man-made improvements have already been removed. Is that correct?
Okay. Oh,
So
they've been
what I'm just saying,
removed.
that we don't need to mention anything about that in the revision. It's already taken place.
Okay, so we don't have to deal with that then. Are we ready to vote on these two resolutions?
I am, sir.
Okay, can you just state the first motion for us?
Okay, so the first motion is to grant Mr. Cassell's appeal.
Okay. Okay. So by granting his appeal, we're dismissing him from any requirements. Now, I would certainly hope that the Cassells would work with the HOA, and if, to remedy these violations, which may mean if access is required through your property, I would hope that you would, grant this and not fight with them over this issue. Okay. All right, so we have our first motion. Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip? Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Okay, so we have granted your appeal. Thank you for coming out and speaking to us. Okay, and can you read us the second motion?
So the second motion is to deny the Point Homes Association appeal, but modify the recommendations by the county to require restoration and a surety to cover the restoration.
I think, can I say just one thing?
Yes.
I would think that I would like to define restoration as standard practices for management of vegetation to reestablish a natural area. That's, to me, not talking about tremendously expensive plants. I don't want, of course, Wilson has his input into it, but you're not talking about the standard state recommendations. You're not talking about thousands upon thousands of dollars. You're talking about a minimal sum that will assure that the work be done properly.
The
I
term
just
we
want-
use,
I just
Mr.
want to
Apperson,
understand
is
that
conservation planting, which differs from landscape planting.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very, very greatly, sir. You understand exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, sir.
Hey, is that clear? Hey, if you want to quote.
Michael, excuse me, Mr. Wilson, can I ask you your opinion of that comment, please? Since I'll be going, making recommendations to you, standard conservation practices in accordance with State Forest Service guidelines. Does that meet your approval?
I understand what you mean.
Does that meet you got to be part of this too to have it work. Is that okay with you?
That's fine.
Okay.
We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Apperson. Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for coming out. We appreciate your input in the process, and staff will be happy to work with you. I believe that concludes our board considerations for tonight. Are there any matters of special privilege? Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So we are now adjourned.